Hello, and it's a Monday morning. It's Dublin City FM, and of course, it must be me, Gillian Gottsell, on Making a Difference. So my guest today is Dan Harris, who is the CEO of Neurodiversity in Business. And Dan, thank you so much for coming on the show.
Thank you. Really pleased to be here, and thank you for the invitation.
Well, I'm delighted because I only really discovered about neurodiversity in business last week. And I went, whoa, there's so much here that I didn't know. So perhaps, can we start with the very basics? Neurodiversity in business, what is it?
Yeah, thank you. So Neurodiversity in Business is a new charity which we launched in Parliament in March of this year. We are an industry forum designed to improve what corporates do around neurodiversity and to help on that journey to build neuro-inclusive workplaces. We're an industry group. We have over 100 big corporate members and some really kind of high-profile names who we think will be instrumental in driving forward the change across society that we want to see. We're also very respectful of the fact that businesses and corporates can actually be seen and indeed do the leading across society. We're looking to help organisations understand that neurodiversity doesn't need to sit in the too hard to deal with bucket anymore.
Okay, so neurodiversity, I mean, neuro is to the brain and diversity. So we're looking at people who think and who are and who be, if you like, in different forms. Does this cover the whole spectrum? Is that what we're talking about here, from mild autism to right the way through, maybe more serious job impacting conditions?
Yeah, well, if we take a step back and think about where the term neurodiversity came from, so it was coined by the eminent sociologist Judy Singer, and neurodiversity for her was a concept which described the fact that all of our brains operate in different ways, and actually in terms of kind of conditions or topics that one would associate with, that could include dyslexia, dyspraxia, autism spectrum condition, as you mentioned, which is a wide spectrum, and a number of other topics, ADHD as well. But as well as it being a kind of a spectrum, a definition of what these topics cover, it's also at its heart a social movement, one that says, actually, we are just different in terms of how we process information and understand the world around us, rather than being deficient. So we're trying to move away from that medical diagnosis model into a social model, which considers actually it's society and organisations that need to adapt rather than the individuals themselves.
Okay, that makes more sense because, and you're right, of course you're right, but you're saying that we all process things differently, even in a neutral environment. So even though, for example, I might not have a diagnosis of a difference in the way I think, I don't think the same as the next person sitting next to me. So it's kind of thinking that actually it's just we all think differently, and it's how to accommodate maybe some people who find it harder to fit into maybe some of the social norms. Is that perhaps a good explanation?
Yeah, that's definitely part of it. And I think you were alluding to the fact that even with neurotypical brains, so ones that are not neurodivergent, within that population or set of people, everyone's got different life experiences, everyone has been educated in a different way, and indeed the inherent way they process information is different. So it's just trying to highlight that actually we should also be focusing on the strengths rather than the challenges. So across the different neurodiverse conditions, there are a number of strengths which are pronounced, and actually some of the greatest achievers across the corporate world are neurodivergent. I won't go into names, etc. But if you look across the economy, some of the brightest minds across science, commerce, industry have been neurodivergent. So we're trying to highlight that actually neurodiversity can and is a competitive advantage.
And I think it's a good point, reading through some of your literature on the website as well. It's not just a CSR, we have to be good and look after everybody. It benefits business, and that's why your focus is on the business. There's actually there is benefits and pluses to be gained by engaging with people across the divergent spectrum, if you like.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. And what we've seen, and I've got probably over 20 years of corporate experience, particularly in the last 5 or so years, and more so since COVID, really, we're in an absolute war for talent in the corporate world. There is a significant excess of opportunities, highly skilled opportunities, and organisations are really fighting for top quality talent like never before. They've increasingly become aware that there is a vast untapped resource or talent pool out there of the neurodivergent talent. And unfortunately, because of deficiencies in our education and our medical system, a lot of those individuals have historically been disenfranchised from gaining meaningful employment. So what the organisations are picking up on is actually, if you have neuro-inclusive working practices when you're within the organisation, but even before that, the neuro-inclusive recruitment practices, you can tap into that really high quality talent.
And I think it's right in saying, I mean, it's like, things are always done a certain way. So when people are being interviewed for jobs, they tend to go the same way for everybody. And through my recent reading, there are other ways of employing people or deciding if people can benefit an organisation rather than the straight face-to-face panel interview, which can be off-putting for people who are neurodivergent.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point, Jill. And I think the reality is that kind of competency-based interview model, which has stuck for the last 50, 100 years, isn't necessarily the right way to assess talent across the breadth of the neurodivergent spectrum. So, as you and I know, some people who excel in interviews are the ones who are able to instantly gain a connection with you, perhaps be very kind of forward in terms of their kind of confidence, and also being able to explain exactly what they've done to contribute to value creation. But that doesn't always map to the people who will be able to have their skills best matched to the requirements of the job. So if you consider the example of potentially someone who doesn't necessarily feel confident in speaking in front of a large room, potentially someone who struggles to maintain eye contact, which people place a lot of focus and attention on, you're going to be missing out on a big cohort of high quality people if you have an old fashioned way of assessing people through recruitment. And actually, Jill, my final point would be this even starts before recruitment, because I think corporates sometimes fall into that hole of fairly kind of vague and imprecise job recruitment adverts. So where traditionally we may have said things like, we want a team player, we want someone who's very well-rounded, that might be excluding a significant talent pool. So businesses, as they've matured, have increasingly recognised that the strength of a team isn't necessarily having 10 very well-rounded people. It could be having a number of people who have particular strengths in other areas, but maybe don't have the strengths or they have development areas in others. So it's accepting the fact that the strength and success of a team is based on the skills of the individuals within it rather than individualized skills.
That makes total sense, doesn't it? Can you imagine all these jolly people who are wonderful at eye contact and emotional intelligence and maybe are not the best people to get the job done, whatever it is. And actually, using that term emotional intelligence, that was something that's been hawked around a lot in recent years. But in actual fact, you don't necessarily need emotional intelligence to do certain jobs.
No, absolutely. And, I think organisations have, particularly over the last 5 years, also woken up to the point that a significant portion of the traditional jobs over the next 20, 30 years are actually going to be automated. So robotics is going to have a disproportionate impact, probably one that we haven't all realised sufficiently yet. So those what are called kind of straight line thinking roles are ones which are more likely to be automated and done by computers or robotics. The deeply analytical or creative skills which neurodivergent talent often outperform on, those will tend to be the skills that are most high in demand in the future. So the timing is really right, Jill, at the moment, in that organisations are increasingly now focusing on neurodiversity and the value that it can bring as a competitive advantage. But equally, the job market is changing, possibly quicker than at any time since the previous industrial revolution. And we know what a change that had on our society as a whole.
And it is interesting, you're right. I mean, I keep on laughing at the idea of employers saying they want team players, which is grand. Of course, you want to have a nice, jolly office place. But of course, with the COVID and remote work, that would have also brought an awareness of how people interoperate and how they can, they don't necessarily need to be in the office. And for people who maybe don't like that jolly, this jolly cheerleader image in my head, people can work effectively in different ways, not 9 to 5 and remotely or through the night, whatever way people want to work. And I think that's quite important too as well, the realization that our work methods need to be looked at again.
Yeah, I think that's a really pertinent point, Jill. And COVID and the lockdowns were obviously terrible, and it's had a significant impact on people and our economy. But actually what it's done from a positive sense is it has highlighted the fact that the reasonable adjustments which some neurodivergent employees have been asking for years, such as the ability to work from home or the ability to have reasonable adjustments in their working environment in terms of environmental conditions around them. Often businesses have found those to be either perceived as being costly to implement or administratively complex to implement. But actually, the reality is that back in March 2022, we all rushed to work from home. Most of us did. And we were pretty good and quick about getting back on our feet and operating our businesses as normal. So it has kind of blown away that notion that we can't accommodate the individual preferences. And I'd always come back to this point, Jill, which is that organisations these days, again, thinking about that war for talent, they need to be asking a very simple question, which is, how can we as a business adapt so that we can get the best out of our staff? How can we enable you as an employee to deliver to your full potential? And, it's that maxim that if you get this right for the neurodivergent employees, you get this right for the whole business.
Actually, that's a really good point. I remember once interviewing a CEO here in Ireland who was implementing parent-friendly practices in the work, including things like not having meetings before 9 o'clock, for example, or finishing at 5, sort of doing this. And as she pointed out, this woman, she's very, very well known here, but she was saying, I'm not actually a parent, but these parent-friendly practices benefit me too as well, because if I want to go for an early morning swim, I can. So it's like, okay, you're doing this to assist and to help and get the most out of neurodivergent people, but it also helps the rest of the folk who would have pottered along without maybe asking for or getting better conditions.
That's right. And, a brighter mind than mine. A brighter mind than myself, Dr. Nancy Doyle has been researching around universal design. So encapsulating what she says is that actually, build these practices in as part of your business as usual, rather than have specific programs for neurodivergent talent. Mm-hmm. Obviously, the deficiencies in the way we operate need to be dealt with particularly for the neurodivergent talent. But universal design borrows from the social model around disability and all of the kind of positive movements we've made around D&I in areas of sexuality, gender balance, ethnicity, and latterly, to some extent, socioeconomic, and tries to say, look, let's just design these principles in rather than be reactive once an employee's in after 6 months and potentially might be looking for adjustments because their day zero experience wasn't terribly good.
And are people reluctant to divulge if they are on the spectrum? Is that something up till now has been sort of been seen as a stigma or something like that?
It has. And, that's why we've been so proactive on the awareness piece within neurodiversity in business. So I'm really proud of both the volume and caliber of organisations who have joined us, but probably more importantly, those individuals within the organisations who have gone out there and done a promotional video for us and for themselves, which says, actually, I'm within a big organisation, I've been here for decades, and I am at the top of the tree. And I think it's incredibly powerful to have those role models that can actually show the neurodivergent talent that's coming into the workforce early on. I would also say that it's really interesting to me the difference in kind of culture across the generations. We're finding that the younger employees and potential employees coming through that recruitment pipeline are actually a lot more confident to self-disclose. They're able to, pretty quickly and easily define actually what aspect of the work process do I need to gain support on, and how can you as a business get the best out of it. And so we're kind of attacking it from two angles, trying to support that self-disclosure at the early stages of the career, but also through the fact that now neurodiversity is being talked about at the top table, we're also encouraging those senior business leaders, maybe they're on the board, etc., to actually disclose. And I've been really proud about some individuals, again, who I won't name, but who have come out and explained, look, I'm neurodivergent, I've worked my way through this organisation, and this is my journey. And I think that kind of lived experience is so powerful to hear.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, and I agree, because if as somebody, and you're right, the younger generation, the more accepting, there's a lot more conversations. And then if you can see someone who's been successful comes out and says, well, actually, and possibly also to share some of the challenges that they've had, because there wasn't this more welcoming environment or culture maybe they had to fight for their corner harder than other people. But does it go back to, like you mentioned before, like education? I mean, it's not just when you do the job interview, it's before that. And does it go back before that again to education? How important is it to start talking about neurodivergence at a much earlier stage?
Yeah, it absolutely is, because when we're thinking about the corporate world, what we also need to be thinking about is who's not in the room. So what I mean by that is who's been excluded from even the opportunity to gain access to meaningful employment. So this starts very early on in the academic cycle, and one of the earliest deficiencies we have with our model in I couldn't say the Western world, but at least the UK, is that we don't invest enough in early diagnosis and then therapeutic intervention. So the reality is with budget constrained health services and a fragmentation between NHS trusts and clinical commissioning groups, there's often an internal budgetary battle around how much you allocate for early diagnosis and then therapeutic support. I would love for society to evolve their thinking in actually, if you look in a very narrow sense around the total economic cost to the public purse, we need to be considering the cost of educational deficiencies, not gaining meaningful employment, spending a disproportionate amount of time on benefits, having to access the healthcare system more significantly. All of these aspects are significant costs later on in the life cycle of a neurodivergent person if we don't invest early on. And there's so much academic research out there now which shows that the significant value of early intervention, but we still haven't adapted our kind of commissioning models as yet across health. I would also say there's been some great movement. Matt Hancock has been very high publicity on this, and he's been a great ally to the neurodivergent movement around screening for dyslexia and then training. And the thinking there is evolving into, we need to be cognizant of the fact that dyslexia occurs within individuals, but there's a lot of co-occurrence of conditions. So what I mean is, for example, an autistic person would be disproportionately likely also to have ADHD. So we need to avoid also just putting people in very narrow buckets, because as the great Professor Amanda Kirby says often, there is such co-occurrence of ND conditions that we need to be considering the individual and their needs rather than just the diagnosis.
And do many people, again, because it's people are more aware of it now, I guess, because before autism, I'm just using that as an example. I know that there's a very strong organisation here in Dublin where, As I Am, it's called, and they have evenings in shops where they turn off all the music, their sensory or more sensitive to people who may have autism, who find, you know, bright lights and music, loud music, upsetting in their shop inside, which will never occur to someone who is neurotypical, obviously. But do many people still not get diagnosed? I mean, do people, you know, my age, in my 50s, do they turn around and say, well, actually, I only discovered I was on the spectrum last year or something like that? Is that still happening?
Yeah, absolutely. And I'd like to draw out 2 points on this because it's such an important element of neurodiversity, which is that intersectionality with other areas of D&I. So, you know, if we talk about gender balance, the reality is that unfortunately, young females are often missed through the diagnosis route. For example, with respect to autism spectrum condition, as we know, there are significant differences in how young girls and young boys develop. And young girls tend to be a lot better at kind of understanding the social cues and mimicking the environment. And actually, they are better able to mask. So the reality is with females going through the autism spectrum condition diagnosis pathway, they will actually fall out of that pathway or not even get on it. So you will find that there is a disproportionate amount of females who get diagnosed very late on in their life cycle, or indeed the situation worsens for them and they then get diagnosed with borderline personality disorder, or you know, they go into the mental health system because they haven't been supported earlier on. So that's the kind of the gender balance piece. But also there's a really strong piece around ethnicity and race and socioeconomic. So the reality is right now is that corporate should not place undue attention on diagnosis, because diagnosis is a privilege. I'm a middle-class white male, and I am afforded significant privilege, which perhaps other ethnicities and racial groups are not afforded, because in inner city, deprived areas with incredibly stretched NHS services, they are not necessarily going to go through the diagnosis route. So the kind of an obvious example which is thrown out there is that a young black boy in a city school may get mischaracterized as being naughty through their behaviors, rather than the appropriate response, which is, are some of those behaviours indicative of ADHD, for example? Mm-hmm. So we always need to be thinking again, who's not in the room, and recognising that that diagnosis is a privilege in itself.
That's a very powerful statement, Dan, that diagnosis is a privilege. And you're right, because if you are well heeled and so you're white male there, your chances of getting that diagnosis and the therapies that you mentioned earlier are much more likely. There's quite a startling statistic, I think, isn't it? That only like 16% of people who have who are neurodivergent are actually in full-time employment.
Yeah, there are various statistics out there. Unfortunately, they aren't terribly well quantified. And I think the one you were referring to was one from the ONS, which was potentially talking about the proportion of autistic people in full-time paid employment. The National Autistic Society has reported similar figures. But, you know, irrespective of arguing about what the correct percentage is, I think everyone agrees that the employment gap is significantly higher for neurodivergent talent, than it is for the general disability employment gap. And this is why there's so much potential to improve, and there's so much opportunity to get this right, because we've been doing a pretty suboptimal job so far, but organisations are waking up to the fact that some of the greatest minds and the greatest influencers of their future success are going to be neurodivergent, and how can we tap into that talent pool?
It's kind of cool. And it's interesting to think that in the future, and the near future, one hopes that it's a badge of honor. It's just, I have brown hair, I'm neurodivergent. You know, it's not like, oh my God, there's something the matter. It's I'm good at golf, whatever. It's a factor of who you are as opposed to a condition. May I ask us quickly, we're coming to the end now. How did you personally get involved in this space? Do you have any personal experience? Are you neurodivergent, or what drew you to set up and become the CEO of Neurodiversity in Business?
Yeah, the primary reason I think was that my little boy Josh, we call him the Joshy man. He's 8 years old. He's autistic. He's nonverbal. I was projecting forward to the type of society that I wanted him to grow up in with. And, what would his education and employment opportunities be? Now, we've obviously got, a decade until that becomes relevant. But the reality is that this is a multi-decadal fight, really. We're starting significantly behind other areas of D&I, and a lot of organisations are only very, very early on in their process here. So it was a deep kind of personal connection for me. But then also, as I kind of got more exposed to the MD ecosystem, talking with a lot of my peer corporate organisations, that they were really struggling with this. And although there was often executive level support and buy-in, there wasn't the operational level impetus or ability to support that executive level commitment.
Oh, okay, that's really cool. And I totally get you, because I'm the mother of 2 girls, and I do a lot of advocacy for women in my particular sector too as well, because I want them to have equal pay, equal opportunities, just all the things. I'm not saying that I was denied, of course, but generationally on, I'm very passionate about women, and I happen to work mostly in blockchains. That's where my passion lies. But I totally get it. When you've got skin in the game, it makes it a lot more real. So that's amazing. I learned so much over the last week, also interviewing your colleague, and now with you today. I hope the people listening today really enjoyed it. If people want to find out more, Dan, about what you're doing, or just in general, where would you advise them to go looking?
I would advise them to go to neurodiversityinbusiness.org, which is our website, and also follow us on LinkedIn. There's a very active page there, which we post on pretty much daily. One of our impetuses is raising awareness and encouraging other big corporates to join this mission. And then lastly, it's really important to us, the mantra of nothing about us without us. So there's a very strong thread of the neurodivergent voice. So there's also community groups on our LinkedIn and Facebook group that people can join.
Oh, well, thank you so much. And who knows? I mean, I'm just thinking now, it's kind of a weird thought I'm having at the end of this conversation. I wonder if I was assessed, what would it throw up? I have no idea. And I suppose I wouldn't know it unless I had to be. But anyway, it's fascinating. We're all different, but let's wear some of these differences with pride going forward. So thank you so much for your time today, Dan Harris.
Thank you so much. Appreciated the opportunity.
Thank you. And thank you to Sam on sound. And coming up next, Lonesome Highway.